So today I'm going to go through 5 different sections in which that we discuss the areas in which that I feel really have impact on the economy, which will also have impact on your portfolios or, say, for example, finances. And they are trade, taxes, jobs and wages, healthcare, and climate change. I think that through 2020, it really helped put a lot of these things into perspective. So why not break them down and show you exactly where does each and every single one of the candidates stand on it. So let's talk about taxes. So for those that don't know, taxes is pretty much a system that's money that you give to the United States government, and which that is probably taken out of every single paycheck in which that you pay. There's a tax rate based upon what your income level is, and pretty much based upon the income level that goes to the United States government, aka the IRS. And at the end of every single year, you're going to file those taxes. And, for, I guess, most folks, you hope that you get a tax refund. We're not going to get into the heavy duty meat and potatoes of taxes and how that whole system works. I assume that most of you that are watching this video, you probably already understand that concept. So, but when we deduct taxes, or when we take away the potential for the United States government to be able to tax, it takes away from other federal programs in which that the tax money literally covers those things. So within each and every single one of these plans, then ultimately you have to look at it from that perspective. And then from that perspective as well, how does that impact your wallet? Or say, for example, if corporate taxes are also, say, for example, being decreased or increased, that's going to have impact on some of those companies that you're invested in. So let's first do a deep dive into both candidates. So starting off with Donald Trump. Okay, so since we're already living through Donald Trump's era of his tax plan, which he initiated in 2017, I felt like it would probably be more advantageous, especially for the sake of time in this video, to literally just go through the candidate for the Democratic Party, Joe Biden, what his tax plan looks like and how it's in contrast to the current existing plan. So under Biden, he would want to raise the top income tax rate back to 39.6% from 37%, and the top corporate income tax rate to 28% from 21%. So if he's elected, he will apply Social Security taxes to earnings above $400,000, tax capital gains and dividends at ordinary rates for those with annual incomes of more than $1 million, and impose 15% minimum tax on book income of large companies. The tax rate on profits earned by foreign subsidies of U.S. firms will be doubled to 21%. Now, according to the Tax Policy Center, Biden's tax proposals will increase revenue by $4 trillion between 2021 and 2030. It's estimated that 93% of tax increases would be borne by taxpayers in the top 20% of households by income. The top 1% of households would also pay 3/4 of that tax hike. So the next subject is trade. Now, for anybody that saw this spectacle play out from 2018 to now, it's been pretty interesting. So what took place? The United States and China started beefing with each other as it pertains to tariffs, based upon we were putting out X amount of product, but at the same token, we were being taxed, and they were trying to pretty much raise the amount of taxes and tariffs on China, so that way it would be more balanced and quote unquote fair. Now, to put it into perspective, there's 366 million people in the United States versus almost 1.5 trillion, if not 1.5 trillion people in China. So kind of different. But major impacts to both GDP, aka gross domestic product. And so just to give you a quick breakdown of GDP, because it really does matter, when we think about GDP, it represents a few categories. What is it that your country produced? What is it that they brought in? And then on top of that, what is it that they exported? So pretty much what you bring in, what you send out, and then also what you're making. Now, some countries have a higher GDP. The United States sits up there at the top, as one of the countries, as one of the top GDP producers, and so too does China. I mean, look at every single product in which you probably buy. It's probably said, made in China. All right, so let's look at some of the key stark differences here. Now, of course, this is as it pertains to a plan. So let's quickly just go through kind of like the history from 2018 to, let's just say, now. So the trade war with China has been the centerpiece of Trump's trade policy during his first term. He promised to put America first in all dealings with countries and penalize those the United States has a high trade deficit with, or he believes are unfairly taxing American companies overseas. There is no sign he plans on changing his strategy, but experts say that he must be careful about angering Beijing while the overburdened U.S. healthcare system depends on China for medical supplies. It accounts for 48% of all personal protective equipment imports in the United States. The monthly international trade deficit was $39.9 billion as of February 2020. The lowest since September 2016. To this was the impact of COVID-19 on Chinese manufacturing. To put that into perspective of why is it that data makes sense is because of the fact that Donald Trump literally kind of like just went after everybody. Like he literally said, this trade deficit that we have with China has to be more balanced, and pretty much any other country that kind of like does the same thing, these hands are ready to eat for everyone. Like literally, he was going after everyone. Now, to put it into perspective, since Biden hasn't been president yet, here's what his plan says. Biden plans to help America's position in the global economy by investing at home in innovation and the middle class first. He promises to do this before entering any new trade agreements. He also says the best way to confront China on intellectual property and technology transfers is by forming a coalition with allies and partners, not through unilateral tariffs. One of the things in which that we look at as reason for pause when looking at trade is really technology. We're really at the beginning parts of a technological revolution. And with that, we're going to start seeing tons of innovation come through over the next 5 to 10 years, especially with artificial intelligence, difference in communication, aka 5G. And then on top of that, just many other breakthroughs and technological advances. So between the US and China, those two represent the superpowers when it comes to technology. And one wants to take its place over the other. And so when we think about it, some of the main things that we were talking about were intellectual property and technology transfers. Now, how does that make sense? Most companies, when they want to go overseas and do business in China, they have to do what is called technological transfers, which means that they have to work through the United States government and work through a Chinese company in order to do business there. And thus, sometimes or quite often, we hear cases about technological companies having their intellectual property stolen by Chinese manufacturing or Chinese companies for espionage, and then ultimately recreating it and then pretty much selling it for cheap, but then ultimately taking in the revenues. And then thus leaving US companies sitting there holding the bag, and it sucks. For that part, it makes all the sense in the world, because if you're invested in a tech company, that could have grave impacts on, say, for example, any of the technology companies in the world, especially when we think about like artificial intelligence products and devices, especially startups. They are hit huge. So what Joe Biden is saying is that essentially that he wants to take care of America first, of course, but then at the same token, he wants to gather other countries unilaterally and then essentially go and face China when it comes to some of these issues as it pertains to trade. What President Donald Trump is doing is he's going directly at each and every single one of these countries in which that he believes that the United States has been done unfairly. We don't know which one will win out because we haven't seen the inside of Donald Trump's plan. And on top of that, we haven't seen Joe Biden even elected as president to see what would happen. So with that being said, it's something to be cautious about, especially if you're investing into tech. And then also looking at the repercussions that we've seen. Look at the agricultural industry. That was also one of the major parts when it came to the bargaining of such deals, like for example, pork and soybeans. So when we think about it, some of those industries within agriculture have been significantly impacted because of this trade war. Some for good, some for bad. And also the same thing can be said for manufacturing. But I would do more of a deep dive personally, if I were you, to just see exactly how big of an impact it is. In some cases, it's very huge. And if it has that huge of an impact, and if you're looking to invest there, that can have a grave impact on your portfolio, just for perspective. So the next part is jobs and wages. Now, both candidates have infrastructure plans. Now, let's just get to how they differ. So Donald Trump is running on this America First campaign, where it's pretty much build in America and buy American. That's the focus. I think where Joe Biden's plan is focused on, especially when it comes to jobs and wages and where they differ, is he wants to create universal $15 minimum wage, in which that I think that when it comes from Joe Biden's side of things, he's more so focused towards essentially $15 minimum wage federally, whereas Donald Trump does not. Also, where they kind of like come together as their plans are somewhat similar, they both want to reinvest as it pertains to infrastructure. Now, there's a slight little problem there because this goes beyond the presidency and it comes into, say, for example, the other landscape, which is Congress. Some Republicans, and Republican Party happens to represent the majority of the Senate, is that they don't want to do any significant spending when it comes to infrastructure, whereas Democrats do. Now, I mean, you can get into it for all we care. It's just that's what the record shows. Where does that sit as it pertains to the economy and also your portfolio and your wallet? Millions of jobs have been erased due to COVID-19, and they may take a while to return. Trump's idea to spur job creation is through a $2 trillion infrastructure bill. He has floated the idea to the government by buying 4 or 5 years worth of plane tickets to help the industry with cash. He has also stopped the issuance of new green cards for 60 days back in May and June of 2020 to protect American workers during this time, and asked his administration to review guest worker programs. When it comes to Joe Biden, he says that he wants to create millions of middle-class jobs through his infrastructure plan. This involves building renewable energy infrastructure, anchor institutions, and climate-resilient industries. It includes increasing funding for such programs as the New Markets Tax Credit, the Community Development Financial Institutions, aka CDFI, and Economic Development Administration on agency within the United States Department of Commerce. To help manufacturing, he plans to quadruple funding for the Manufacturing Extension Program and provide tax credits for investing in communities that experience mass layoffs or the closure of major government institutions. When we think about it in perspective, I mean, these types of investments, whether on both sides, will have major impacts. Without them, there are also major impacts as well. What I would recommend is that you go through and read through each and every single one of their plans just to see exactly how they impact. So for example, when we look at the industrial sector, when there's construction, then you look at companies like Caterpillar and Deere. When we think about, say, for example, aerospace, we think about Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and Boeing. When we think about also minimum wages, we think about a lot of companies around as a whole that still charge less than $15 in minimum wage. Now, there are some states to say that they're going to literally say, we'll accept the $15 minimum wage. They've adopted that, and that's great because there's a vast portion of folks out there that are making far less, and I think that we need to raise that so that way we can improve this inequality and wealth gap. As you can see, I really hate talking about politics because, I mean, really politics is a spur of ideas. And honestly, it's kind of hard to tell exactly whose plan is going to be right because of the fact that, honestly, we don't really see the effects on the economy until years later. Now, sometimes you see their impacts happen way sooner, like, for example, when it comes to healthcare. when you see mandates that take place, and which leads me into the third subject of the economy, healthcare. So back when Barack Obama was president and Joe Biden was vice president, they brought something into legislation called the Affordable Care Act. That brought forth a major shift as it pertains to being able to receive healthcare without any previous condition. And that also helped as it pertains to pricing as well. Now, since Donald Trump has been elected, he has been gutting pieces of the Affordable Care Act since he wasn't able to just officially wipe it away. And so here we sit where we're dealing with a gutted Affordable Care Act or a gutted healthcare system. And that's going to be something that's going to be major, that's going to be on the table. Here's why. So in the 2021 budget proposal, the Trump administration has proposed a deep healthcare spending cut over the next decade, especially to Medicaid, $900 billion, and Medicare, $450 billion. It requests $94.5 billion for the Department of Health and Human Services, a 10% decrease from the 2020 enacted level. Trump has repeatedly promised to bring down drug prices, but we haven't seen any significant results thus far. Since the Affordable Care Act was signed into law, which Joe Biden sat next to Barack Obama when it was enacted, he says he will pretty much expand it. He will eliminate 400% income cap on tax credit eligibility and lower the limit on the cost of coverage by 8.5% of income. Instead of Medicare for all, as suggested by his more progressive rivals, Biden wants to create a public health insurance option like it. He also wants to lower the eligibility age for Medicare to 60 from 65. So when we put it into the numbers, his campaign has said his plan will insure more than an estimated 97% of Americans and cost $750 billion over a decade. It will be paid for through revenue from his capital gains reform. The cost estimation, however, was provided by the campaign last year before expanding Medicare access to younger people was suggested. So one thing that we want to keep in mind is that healthcare spending rose to about 4.6% in 2018, which amasses for about $3.6 trillion. So if you think about it, that means that the cost of every American is about $11,172 when it comes to healthcare spending. Interesting. The final subject that we're going to discuss is climate change. And these candidates couldn't be any further in polar opposites when it comes to such an issue or subject. So let's get into it. I think the easiest way to say is President Donald Trump believes that climate change is a hoax. It's not real. And Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee, believes that climate change is very real. Yeah, let's just see what the data has to say. Climate change is mentioned in many of Joe Biden's plans, especially infrastructure and trade, but critics say his plan isn't ambitious enough. Okay, that's fair. Biden's target for the United States is to achieve 100% clean energy, to achieve a 100% clean energy economy, and reach net zero emissions no later than 2050. By contrast, the Green New Deal espoused by Bernie Sanders calls for using only renewable energy for electricity and transportation by 2030 and complete decarbonization of the economy by 2050. Biden wants to rejoin the Paris Agreement and demands a worldwide ban on fossil fuel subsidies. He also wants to install 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations nationwide by 2030. He doesn't want to ban fracking, but he does plan to ban new permits for oil and gas drilling on federal land and offshore. When we think about it, that's interesting and that's very cool. We're already starting to see that a lot of states are starting to step in and lower pretty much their emissions to zero as a mandate for the state. And that's even more super duper dope. The interesting thing in why we say that they're complete polar opposites is because we've actually seen what the Trump presidency has pretty much elected. They have stepped out of the Paris Agreement. They've also have cut significantly from federal environmental organizations, decreased the spending there. And on top of that, we're not making any significant investments as it pertains to renewable energy. And we've released a lot of the earlier legislation that blocked from such things as hurtful to the environment and the climate, such as oil and fracking. We've increased significantly. So how does that affect you? We see from the Come Up series, we see that energy is a slowly dying dinosaur. And we see that renewable energy is kind of like the millennial that's starting to, or the young adult that's starting to grow up and become the adult. And we're starting to see that shift in, say, for example, the economics. When we think about it, who are those companies that stand to benefit from such zero emission economies? Well, of course, there's electric vehicle makers, your Teslas, your Rivians, your Neos, and many others. When we think about solar, there's quite a few solar companies out there that are looking to make waves. You also have to include Tesla in that. When we think about a lot of the other players across the landscape, this is going to be huge. Now, what does that do for the environment? You have to ask yourself if climate change really matters. If you are a parent and you see what's happening right now in the world as it pertains to climate change, ask yourself this: would you want to take part in helping to improve that for your children and your children's children, so that way they can grow up in a world in which that is better than how we lived in it, or not? All right, so let's just do a quick recap here. When we think about taxes, that's your personal finances. Depending on where you are in the spectrum of the tax bracket, it could be very, very advantageous for you, or it could be not so advantageous. When we think about your tax returns and tax credits and everything else, as well as what's coming out of your paycheck. When we think about healthcare, you have to ask yourself, how much do you want to spend when it comes to healthcare? Would you rather have to eat more of the cost, or would you rather, say, for example, some of these things be offered to you by the government getting involved and providing something in which that doesn't discriminate towards your pre-existing conditions or whatever? And then on top of that, some of the companies that we're investing into, how does that affect them? Insurance companies, healthcare companies, also at the same token, pharmaceutical companies. When we look at jobs and wages, that has an impact on pretty much practically every company. When you have a mandate that says that minimum wage increases, some companies, they have benefited significantly by their profits by doing such a thing. Now, there are a lot of conscious companies out there that say, hey, we're going to pay a minimum wage and pay people fairly and whatnot. And that's cool. There are some in which that don't believe in that. It really comes down to values. And when we think about it from a corporate standpoint, when you raise minimum wage across the board, of course, that's going to increase operating costs, which if operating cost increases, then that hits profits. Now, when we think about larger companies, I don't think that in the grand scheme of things, that will have a grave impact. When we think about medium-sized to small companies, that could have an impact. When we look at trade, if you're a startup within, say, for example, tech, manufacturing, agriculture, or anything else that requires for import-export of services and products, that can have an impact based upon how is it that we're able to come to an agreement with China and move forward in the future. So these are all the things in which that are going to be on the docket, and based upon the president that you choose, and not only just the president in which that you choose, but also the Congress that's going to back it. When we think about also what's on the docket is a lot of those major mega cap tech companies. If Congress becomes a blue wave, then essentially you're going to see some of those issues come to the forefront. With something a little bit more bilateral, then essentially you may see, say, for example, somewhat of a balance. All these things play in some form of a balance and will have some type of impact towards your portfolio. And that's what we call variable change when it comes to investing and managing your finances. And as those things change, so too you must be strategically ready to be able to make such changes. I hope this helps, and I hope that I came with somewhat of the greatest unbiased opinion in which that I can bring forth, because I didn't want to put in my perspective. I just wanted to give you the common sense and also let you know where the issues lie based upon what each candidate has gone on the record to propose. Now, I guess if you would like to, you could check out either one of the candidates. They have pretty much their websites in which they have their plans. And I'll post that in the description down below so that way you can check it out. Until next time, I'm Mark Monroe, and this was your Come Up Election Night. If you like what you saw in this video, go ahead and smash that like button. If you didn't like it, it's okay. This episode was hard for me too. So go ahead and hit the dislike button and please tell me exactly how is it that we could have done better. And also make sure you voice your opinion as it pertains to what are some of the issues in which that I may have missed. We always encourage healthy discussion here at the Come Up series. And then on top of that, if you want to be in the know, go ahead and hit that bell so that way you can be a part of the notification squad. And if you ain't subscribed yet, I don't know what you're doing. So, go ahead and hit it. Don't worry, I'll wait. Okay, all right, so now I can get off your screen. All right, thank you so much for watching this video. Until next time, I'm Mark Monroe. I'll see you again. Peace.